It was a quiet night, the kind where the world felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. A cold wind whispered through the trees, bending branches that groaned under the pressure of the season. In the distance, a lone figure trudged through the underbrush, the crunch of dead leaves beneath his boots, the only sound breaking the silence. He wasn't sure what had drawn him out here tonight. Maybe it was the feeling of being watched, or the restless ache in his bones that seemed to guide him, one step after another, deeper into the woods. For hours he'd wandered aimlessly, the dark expanse of the forest swallowing him whole. He knew he should turn back, but something kept pulling him forward. And then he heard it. A soft, pitiful sound. A whimper, faint but unmistakable, like an animal in pain. It stopped him in his tracks, his senses suddenly heightened, every nerve alive and alert. The wind had died, the world holding its breath once more. His pulse quickened. The sound was unmistakable now. A cry for help, almost human, but not quite. He moved toward the noise, each step more calculated than the last. His flashlight pierced the darkness, casting long shadows over the trees and underbrush. The deeper he went, the more intense the sound became, until he could almost feel it in his chest. He reached a small clearing, and there, huddled in the dirt, was a creature. At first glance, it looked like a large, injured animal. Its fur was matted and caked with mud, its breathing shallow and labored. It lay on its side, barely able to lift its head as it whimpered, its eyes wide with panic. But there was something wrong, something that didn't sit right with him. The creature's eyes, they weren't like any animal he'd ever seen. They were too intelligent, too knowing. The way it stared at him, silently pleading for help, sent a shiver down his spine. It was almost as if it could understand him. It wasn't just an animal. It was something more. His instincts told him to turn and run, but his feet refused to move. He crouched down slowly, the beam of his flashlight falling on the creature's face. For a moment, all he could see were the eyes, dark and deep, like pools of ink, reflecting his own fear. His heart pounded in his chest. "Hey there," he murmured, unsure why he was speaking to it, unsure if it could even understand. "You're hurt. Let me help you." He reached out a hand, hesitating just inches from the animal's fur. The moment his fingers brushed against its side, a shock of energy pulsed through him, like static electricity, only far stronger. It made him pull back instinctively, but the creature's eyes followed his every movement, not in fear, but in silent desperation. All right," he said, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "I'm not going to hurt you." He gently placed his hand on the creature's side again, this time with more intention. The skin was warm, too warm, and the fur was softer than any animal's he had touched before. It was almost unnatural. There was a strange, almost metallic scent in the air now, one that sent another jolt of unease through him. With great care, he helped the creature to its feet. It leaned heavily on him, its body trembling as it struggled to maintain balance. He could feel the weight of it, but there was also something unsettling about the way it moved. It wasn't just an animal. There was an intelligence behind those movements, a deliberate, purposeful way it shifted its weight. "Easy. There," he whispered, helping it stay upright. "Let's get you out of here." Just as he took a step forward, the creature gave a sudden guttural cry, the sound jagged and sharp, echoing through the trees. He froze, heart hammering in his chest. The cry wasn't natural. It was almost otherworldly. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment the world around him seemed to freeze. And then it happened. The air around them seemed to ripple. The ground beneath his feet vibrated, as though something massive was shifting beneath the earth. He looked around in a panic, but there was nothing to see, just the forest stretching out in all directions. But the feeling, the pressure in the air, it was unmistakable. The creature's eyes locked with his once more, and in that moment, he saw it. A flicker of something in its gaze, something that sent a chill through him, a deep, primal fear that he couldn't shake. The world around him seemed to close in, and then the creature collapsed into his arms. The night had passed in eerie silence. The creature, no, the alien princess, hadn't moved. Its body, once so full of life, now lay motionless, cradled in his arms like a fragile thing, delicate yet inexplicably powerful. His instincts screamed at him to flee, to abandon it, and run back to the safety of civilization. But some inexplicable force, kept him rooted to the spot. He had never felt so torn in his life. In the dim light of dawn, he looked down at the creature's face again. Despite its alien appearance, there was something undeniably human about it. The delicate features, the way the light hit its skin, a kind of shimmering iridescence he couldn't quite place. It was almost like something out of a dream. Her body wasn't just alive, it was glowing, faintly, like the pulse of a distant star. "What are you?" he whispered softly, as though speaking the words aloud might break the strange spell that had fallen over them. The creature didn't answer, but her eyelids fluttered. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but enough to stir a flood of hope within him. He gently shook her, his hand trembling as it hovered over her fragile form. "Please," he urged, his voice hoarse, "you have to wake up." For a moment, nothing. He leaned back slightly, his heart sinking with the thought that perhaps she was gone. But then her eyes opened, and in that instant everything changed. Her eyes weren't just alien, they were intelligent. The moment she focused on him, a strange sensation washed over him, like he was being pulled into her gaze, drawn into a vast, endless expanse. For a heartbeat, the world around him seemed to blur, and he could have sworn he heard her thoughts. Fragments, fleeting and distant. The sensation was so overwhelming that he stumbled backward, instinctively pulling away. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. He didn't even know why he asked it. There was no way this was okay. Nothing about this felt normal. The alien princess blinked slowly, then winced as though the effort was painful. She lifted a hand, trembling, and placed it on her chest. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. The silence between them stretched on, heavy and thick. "Please," he urged again, this time more insistently. "If you can hear me, let me help you." She gazed at him, those strange, shimmering eyes still locked on his. And then, for the first time, she spoke. "Help me," she rasped, her voice faint, barely more than a whisper. "Before they come." His heart skipped a beat. "Who's coming?" he asked, suddenly aware that he might be in far deeper than he had ever intended. The weight of his decision to help her or not was becoming far heavier than he could bear. But her gaze softened for a moment, her eyes closing as if the effort was too much. "They'll come for me. They always do." Her words, though faint, carried the weight of something ancient and dangerous, something that felt as if it belonged to the very core of the universe. "They'll come for me," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "To finish what they started." A cold chill spread down his spine. "What do you mean?" "What started?" he pressed, unable to stop the question spilling out. He was caught in the gravity of her words, his mind whirling with possibilities. Alien? Princess? What kind of danger was she talking about? Before he could ask anything else, the sound of footsteps breaking through the brush snapped him back to reality. His heart raced and adrenaline surged through his veins. Someone was coming. Someone or something was following them. The princess's eyes widened, a sudden panic flashing across her face. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and desperation. Without a word, she pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly as if every movement caused her pain. She reached out, her hand brushing against his arm as she stumbled. "Run!" she breathed. "Now!" Without hesitation, he grabbed her arm, supporting her weight as she leaned against him. They moved through the forest, the path ahead murky and uncertain. His mind raced as fast as his feet. What was happening? Who was coming? And what kind of world had he just stepped into? They moved quickly, darting between trees, branches scratching at his face as he focused on putting one foot in front of the other. The princess was unsteady, but she clung to him with surprising strength, her breath shallow and quick. "You have to tell me more," he urged as they ran. "Who are you? What's going on?" Her voice was strained as she spoke. "I am royalty. My name is Rilia, but I was betrayed. My people, they will—" Her words were cut off as a distant roar echoed through the trees, deep and guttural, vibrating in the air. The ground trembled beneath his feet. Whatever it was huge. He didn't wait for another word. They kept running. Minutes later, the clearing ahead came into view. The air felt different here, still, as though they had stepped into a different world altogether. The trees parted just enough to reveal a small, abandoned cabin. "Inside," she whispered urgently, her voice weak. "They'll follow our trail." He didn't question her. He pushed the door open and they stumbled inside. The cabin was old, decrepit, and dusty, but it would have to do. He moved quickly, locking the door behind them. They both collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. His heart hammered in his chest, and sweat beaded on his forehead. The world outside felt so distant, so foreign. He glanced over at Rilia, who was breathing heavily, but seemed to be regaining some strength. "What's going on? Who's after you?" She closed her eyes for a moment as though gathering her thoughts, then met his gaze with an intensity that made him feel like she could see straight through him. "They're coming for me," she repeated. "They're hunters. From my world. They came to take me back." "Why?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What do they want with you?" Rilia's eyes flickered, her expression darkening. "I was born to lead, but my people betrayed me. They abandoned me when I was needed most. I fled, and now they will stop at nothing to find me." He took a deep breath, trying to process everything she was saying. "So, you're an alien princess? From another planet?" Her eyes locked onto his again, a flicker of something, regret maybe, passing through them. "Yes, I was sent to Earth for a reason, but now everything has changed." "Why Earth?" he asked, still struggling to grasp the reality of the situation. Rilia's voice was steady now, though tinged with sadness. "Because Earth is the only place where they can't find me. It's hidden. My people never believed that your planet could hold the key to saving us all." The weight of her words settled on his shoulders like a heavy stone. "Saving who?" he asked, almost afraid to know the answer, but before she could respond, the door shuddered. A loud crack echoed through the small cabin. "Who are you?" came a voice. From outside, cold and commanding, and just like that the nightmare had begun. The cold crack of the door, splintering, echoed through the cabin like the sound of an ominous clock ticking down to their final moments. His heart pounded in his chest, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. There was no mistaking it. Whoever was out there was here for her, and they were getting closer. Rilia stiffened next to him, her eyes wide with terror. She had barely been able to stay on her feet before, but now, with the sound of the approaching hunters, she stood upright, leaning against the wooden wall. Her breath was shallow, her chest heaving with panic, but there was something in her gaze, a fierce determination that told him she wouldn't go down without a fight. He could hear the soft crackling of footsteps on dry leaves outside. It wasn't just one person. The sound was unmistakably the crunch of multiple feet, heavy and deliberate. He quickly looked around the cabin, searching for anything they could use as a weapon or barrier. "This is it," Rilia whispered, her voice trembling. "They've found me. They'll stop at nothing to take me back. You have to leave now." His eyes shot to her, incredulous. "What? I'm not leaving you." He couldn't even fathom leaving her behind. Not after everything they'd been through so far. She was more than an alien princess. She was a person, someone who had trusted him, and that trust couldn't be thrown away. "You don't understand," she urged, her voice breaking. "They will kill you to get to me. I can't let them do that. I can't let you die because of me." She wasn't wrong. He knew she wasn't. The urgency in her voice was unmistakable, but leaving her, after everything, was simply not an option. He stood up, his resolve hardening. "Then we fight," he said, his voice steady, even though his pulse was racing. There had to be something they could do. She shook her head desperately. "You don't know what they are. You don't know what they're capable of. Please," she added, her voice breaking. "They're not human. They're more dangerous than anything you can imagine." "Then I'll learn," he said firmly, stepping toward her. His hand found a rusted metal pipe that lay on the ground near the fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was something to defend themselves with. His grip tightened around it, ready for whatever would come through that door. Rilia's eyes flashed, a mix of confusion and admiration. "You really don't understand," she muttered. "If they capture me, if they take me back, it's not just me they're after. They're after the key to everything." She stepped closer, her voice growing more urgent. "You must understand. Earth is a place of power. Your world, it's more significant than you realize." Before he could respond, a sharp crack rang through the air, and the door exploded inward. Splinters of wood scattered in every direction, and a heavy, guttural voice rang out through the silence. "Princess Rhylia," it growled, "you cannot run from your fate." He barely had time to react before two figures stepped into the cabin, tall, shadowy, and terrifyingly inhuman. Their bodies were sleek and dark, their features sharp and angular. The way they moved was unsettling, as though their limbs were too long and too flexible. But it wasn't their appearance that sent chills down his spine. It was the aura of cold, calculating menace that radiated from them. Rilia's eyes went wide with recognition. "No," she whispered. "Not them." The figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing an eerie red, as it studied him with something akin to curiosity. It didn't speak at first, merely observed him, its expression inscrutable. "Human," it said at last, its voice rough, almost mechanical. "You are aiding the princess. Do you know the consequences of that? You have sealed your fate." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He knew this wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. These weren't just aliens, they were hunters, and Rhylia had been right. They were here to take her back, no matter the cost. Rhylia took a step forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "You'll never take me again," she spat. "Not after everything I've learned." The hunter, if that's what it even was, tilted, its head intrigued. "You believe you can escape your destiny, princess. You are weak, and Earth will be your tomb." With that, the creature's companion took a step forward, its long arms extending unnaturally, stretching toward the both of them. There was no hesitation, no mercy in its movements. Rilia's face drained of color as she turned to him. "You need to run," she whispered urgently. "They won't stop until they've taken me. You won't survive this." His eyes flared with defiance. "I'm not leaving you." He took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage he had left. They weren't just going to let her go. They weren't just going to give up. But neither was he. Not without a fight. He raised the metal pipe high, ready to swing it at the nearest hunter, but Rhylia grabbed his arm, stopping him. Her grip was surprisingly strong, despite her condition, and for a moment he met her gaze, reading the desperation in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "there's no time. They're far more powerful than you think. You cannot fight them like this." "Then what do we do?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Just let them take you?" "No, I can't do that." The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the promise of violence. It felt like everything was on the edge, teetering dangerously between life and death. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted this for you." But before he could say anything more, the other hunter advanced, and in an instant the room was filled with an almost unbearable pressure. He could feel it in the air, in the very walls themselves. The creature's presence was oppressive, suffocating. The first hunter raised its arm, and with a flick of its wrist the door flew off its hinges. The force of the blow sent a shockwave through the cabin, knocking him off his feet. He landed hard against the floor, his head spinning. Relia screamed, but it wasn't a scream of fear. It was a scream of anger, of defiance. She pulled herself up with renewed strength, her body glowing faintly as though some hidden power was surging through her. "You can take me," she said, her voice steady now. "But you will not take this planet." The hunters froze for a moment, as though they hadn't expected this kind of resistance. The air between them crackled with tension, and for a brief, fleeting second, he saw a spark in Rilia's eyes, something he hadn't seen before. Power, strength, a force to be reckoned with. The second hunter raised a hand, but this time, Rilia was faster. She moved with an elegance and speed that left him breathless. In a flash, her hand shot out, glowing with energy, and the hunter's arm froze in mid-motion. There was a blinding flash of light as it collided with the hunter, sending it reeling backward. He didn't have time to process what had just happened before the first hunter lunged toward him, but Rilia's voice rang out again, sharp and commanding. "Run!" she shouted, her voice filled with raw urgency. "Get out of here!" He hesitated only for a moment before he dashed for the back of the cabin, taking the opportunity Rilia had given him. He could hear her behind him, her steps frantic but strong. She was fighting them, fighting for her life and for his. He stumbled into the dense woods outside, unsure of where he was going, but knowing one thing for certain: he wasn't leaving her behind. Not now, not ever, but the hunters were coming, and with them came the promise of a darkness that threatened to consume everything. He couldn't run forever. They both knew that, but he would fight. He would survive, and maybe, just maybe, they would find a way to stop this hunt, together. The dense forest surrounding the cabin felt like a labyrinth. The towering trees loomed above, casting long shadows that made every rustle in the leaves sound like a threat. His breath came in quick bursts, his heart still racing from the chaos they'd left behind. Rilia's desperate command to run echoed in his mind, but he couldn't escape. Not without her. His legs burned as he pushed forward, weaving through the thick undergrowth, his eyes darting from one shadow to the next. He had no clear plan, no destination. All he knew was that the hunters were right behind him, and there was no time to waste. Rilia was in danger, and he was the only one who could help her. He pushed through a thicket, barely able to hear his own thoughts over the sound of his racing pulse. The forest was eerily silent now, save for the occasional crack of a branch beneath his feet. A part of him wished he could go back to the cabin and find her again, but that would mean walking right into the hunter's grasp. And he couldn't do that, not when he had no idea what he was up against. Ahead, he spotted a clearing, a patch of moonlight that illuminated the ground like a stage set for some inevitable confrontation. He didn't want to go there, but something in the back of his mind urged him forward, as if a force greater than his own fear was guiding his every step. "Rilia!" he called out, his voice hoarse. "Rilia! Where are you?" The wind carried his words, but there was no response. The silence that followed was deafening. Suddenly, he heard a twig snap behind him. Without thinking, he spun around, raising the metal pipe in his hands, but what he saw made his blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure, a human figure. His heart skipped a beat. It was a man, tall and wiry, dressed in dark tactical clothing. His face was obscured by a mask, but the eyes behind it were cold and calculating. He held a weapon, a rifle, pointed directly at him. "Don't move," the man commanded, his voice low and steady. "You're not going anywhere." For a moment, neither of them moved. The rifle remained fixed on him, unwavering. The man's presence sent a chill down his spine. He didn't know who this was, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't someone who could be trusted. "What do you want?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tremor in his legs. The man's lips curled into something. That might have been a smile. "I think you know exactly what I want. The princess." His stomach dropped. "The hunters weren't the only ones after Rilia. You're with them," he said, his voice thick with disbelief. The man didn't answer at first. Instead, he took a step forward, his boots crunching against the fallen leaves, his grip on the rifle tightened. "I'm not here to hurt you," the man said. "I'm here to help you." The words felt like a lie coming from his lips. There was no sincerity in them, only cold calculation. "But I will hurt you if I must." A cold knot formed in his stomach as the man's meaning became clear. He wasn't here to save them. He was here to use him, to manipulate him into giving up Rilia. And he was willing to go to any length to make that happen. "Help me," he spat. "Is that what you call it? You're just another pawn in their game." The man's eyes flashed with something. Amusement? Frustration? Call it whatever you want. But you're going to make a choice. Help me capture her, and you'll survive, you'll live. But if you don't, well, he gestured with the rifle, you won't last long. His mind raced, trying to process everything. This wasn't just some mercenary or bounty hunter. This man was connected to something bigger, something darker. The coldness in his eyes told him all he needed to know. Whoever he worked for wasn't interested in the consequences. They were only interested in one thing: capturing Rilia. He stepped back, trying to keep the distance between them. "I'll never help you," he said, the words feeling like a promise. The man didn't react immediately. He simply stood there, rifle aimed, studying him with cold detachment. There was no emotion in his gaze. He was just another soldier doing his job, no matter what it cost. For a moment everything was still. Then, without warning, the man lunged forward, moving faster than he anticipated. In one fluid motion, the rifle's barrel was pressed against his chest. "Then I'll have to make you understand the cost," the man said, his voice low and deadly. Before he could react, a flash of movement caught his eye. Someone else had entered the clearing. "Stop!" Rilia's voice, clear and full of authority, cut through the tension like a knife. The man's head snapped toward her, his weapon still aimed at him, but there was no mistaking the sudden shift in his demeanor. His posture tensed, as if he knew the princess was a far more dangerous opponent than he had anticipated. "I'll shoot if I have to," the man warned, his voice barely audible. But Rilia didn't back down. Her form was silhouetted against the moonlight, and there was a fire in her eyes that made him pause. She was standing tall, her posture proud, as though she was the one in control. The power radiating from her was undeniable. "You don't understand," she said, her voice steady but filled with a strength that resonated in the air around them. "You're not going to take me. Not now. Not ever." The man's grip tightened on his rifle, but he didn't move. "You have no idea what you're up against," he said, his voice wavering ever so slightly. "This isn't about you anymore. It's about what's coming, what we need." "What you need," Rilia repeated, her voice low with an edge of disbelief. "You don't even know what you're dealing with. You think you can control me, control Earth, but you're wrong." For the first time, the man hesitated. His rifle wavered slightly, and it was then that Rilia made her move. With a fluid motion, she raised her hand, and a pulse of energy shot out from her palm. The shockwave sent the man flying back, crashing into a tree with a grunt. He slumped to the ground unconscious. The tension in the air lifted almost immediately. Rilia stepped forward, her breath heavy, but her eyes never left the fallen man. "He was never going to be on our side," she muttered. "None of them are." He watched her, a mix of admiration and disbelief in his chest. She wasn't just a princess. She was something else, something far more powerful than he had ever imagined. "What was that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rilia turned to him, her expression unreadable. "That was a glimpse of what I can do when I'm pushed too far." Her eyes darkened, and she clenched her fists. "You're not the only one with a choice to make." Before he could respond, a sudden explosion of noise came from the direction of the cabin. His heart skipped a beat. "They're here," Rilia said, her voice grim. "We need to go, now." Without waiting for a response, she turned and began running through the forest, her speed unnerving. He followed her without hesitation, every step pushing him further into the unknown. The hunters were closing in, and now, with betrayal lurking in the shadows, he had no choice but to follow her into the heart of the storm. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow across the dense forest. He followed closely behind Rilia, every step measured and cautious. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth, and the only sounds were their hurried footsteps and the occasional rustle of branches in the wind. He didn't know how much longer they could keep running. The hunters were closing in, and it was only a matter of time before they found them. But Rilia, she moved like she knew exactly where she was going, like the forest itself bent to her will. Her eyes were focused, intense, as if she were tapping into some inner power, something far beyond anything he had ever seen. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the wind. Rilia didn't look back, but her answer was immediate. "To the heart of the forest," she said. "There's a place there, an old temple. We can't let them find it." He tried to keep up, but his legs felt like lead, the weight of the past few days pressing down on him. They had been running for what felt like hours, but there was no sign of slowing down. The urgency in her voice left no room for questioning. He had learned long ago that when Rilia spoke like that, it was best to follow without asking too many questions. The ground beneath them grew uneven, the path narrowing as the trees grew closer together. They were deep in the heart of the forest now, and it was becoming harder to see. The thick canopy above blocked out most of the moonlight, casting everything into shadow. "You said you were more than just a princess," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "What did you mean by that?" Rilia didn't answer right away, but he could see her jaw tighten, as if she were grappling with something. She glanced over her shoulder, meeting his gaze for the first time in hours. Her eyes were filled with a sadness he hadn't seen before, like a heavy burden weighed on her soul. "I am," she said quietly, "more than just a princess. I'm the last of my kind." He frowned, confusion clouding his thoughts. "What do you mean, the last of your kind?" She stopped, and he almost ran into her. She stood in front of him, her posture rigid, as if she were trying to summon the strength to speak. "I'm not human," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not even from this world." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, everything around him seemed to freeze. The forest, the darkness, the tension, it all melted away in an instant. The air felt thick, as though time itself had paused. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. His mind raced, trying to piece together everything he had learned over the past few days. Rilia was not human. She wasn't. From Earth, it didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. "Rilia," he began, his voice shaking. You're an alien." She nodded, her eyes searching his face for any sign of judgment. "I am, and I've been hiding my true identity for a long time, but now I can't anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything she had just revealed. He tried to process it all, but his thoughts were scattered, spinning in 1,000 different directions. "You're not the only one who's been lied to," she continued, her voice hardening. "The people who are hunting me, they know what I am. They know that I'm the key to everything, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to control me, to control Earth." His heart sank as he began to understand the full scope of what was happening. This wasn't just about a princess on the run. This was about something far bigger. The fate of the planet was at stake, and Rilia was at the center of it all. But why Earth? He asked, still struggling to make sense of everything. Why is Earth so important? Rilia turned to face him fully now, her eyes fierce with determination. Because Earth is a gateway to my people, to everything, and I'm the key to opening it. I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose this. She clenched her fists, her frustration palpable. But now they know. They've found out, and they won't stop until they get me. He felt a chill run down his spine as he understood the gravity of her words. There were forces at play here, forces far beyond his comprehension. But there was one thing he knew for sure. Rilia wasn't just a princess. She was something far more powerful, far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The sound of footsteps brought him back to reality. Rilia's eyes widened in warning, and they both froze. "They're close," she said, her voice urgent. "We need to move, now." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed his arm and pulled him forward, urging him to keep up. The path ahead was becoming even more treacherous, the dense undergrowth making it harder to move quickly. But Rilia seemed to know exactly where she was going, her feet barely making a sound as they moved through the forest. He stumbled over a rock, but Rilia was already ahead, her movements swift and sure. It was as if she had become one with the forest, the trees bending to her will. He couldn't keep up, not at her pace, not with the weight of everything she had just revealed hanging over him. "Rilia!" he called, his voice desperate. "Wait up!" She turned, her expression softening for a moment before she nodded. "We don't have much time," she said. "The temple is just ahead. We need to get there before they do." He tried to steady his breath as he pushed forward. Rilia was right. Every moment counted. But as they neared the clearing ahead, something felt off. The air grew colder, heavier. The familiar sounds of the forest had disappeared, replaced by an eerie silence, and then, just as they entered the clearing, he saw them. The hunters. They were waiting. The group was standing in a semicircle around an ancient stone structure, their weapons trained on the entrance. They had anticipated their arrival. Rilia froze, and for the first time he saw fear in her eyes. But it wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for what would happen if they caught her. "This is it," she whispered, her voice low but steady. "This is where it ends." He couldn't believe what he was hearing. There had to be another way out. He couldn't let them capture her, not after everything they had been through. But the reality of the situation settled in. There was no escape. They were surrounded. He turned to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Rilia, what do we do?" Her eyes softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. "There's nothing more you can do. You've done enough. Now it's my turn." Before he could protest, she stepped forward, her face set in a grim expression. "I'll give myself up," she said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "But you're going to have to trust me. Stay close. Don't let them separate us." His mind was racing. Trust her, after everything they had been through, after everything she had revealed to him. But he knew there was no choice. This wasn't about what he wanted anymore. It was about protecting her, about keeping her safe. "Rilia," he whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes met his, and for a moment it felt like time itself had stopped. Then, without another word, she moved forward, and the hunters closed in. The sound of approaching footsteps reverberated through the clearing, sharp and deliberate. The hunters moved closer, their movements synchronized, as if they were all part of a well-rehearsed routine. Each step they took brought Rilia closer to the center of their circle, and with it, the inevitable conclusion of everything they had been running from. He wanted to scream, wanted to run forward and stop her from giving herself up, but he couldn't. His legs were frozen, his chest tight with fear and helplessness. The truth of Rilia's identity had hit him hard, and now the reality of their situation was becoming all too clear. They were outmatched. They were out of time. Rilia didn't look back. Her face was calm, composed, almost serene, but he could see the storm behind her eyes, the heavy weight of what she had to do to protect not just herself, but everything they had fought for. She wasn't just running from her past anymore. She was making the ultimate sacrifice for the future. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice hoarse. "There has to be another way. We can fight. There's always another way." She glanced over her shoulder, giving him a soft, almost sad smile. "Sometimes there is no other way. Sometimes the only choice left is the hardest one." The hunters were closing in. Their leader, a tall man with piercing eyes, stepped forward, his hand raised. "You've caused us enough trouble, Princess. You don't get to escape anymore. This is where it ends." Rilia's eyes narrowed, and for a split second he saw a flicker of the power she had kept hidden. But she didn't move to fight. Instead, she held up her hands in surrender, her voice unwavering. "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to make sure you don't destroy everything. You think you can control what's coming, what's already here, but you can't. Not anymore." The leader's eyes darkened. He took another step forward, his voice filled with contempt. "You're deluded. You really believe you have the power to stop us." Rilia's gaze never wavered. "I don't need to stop you. I just need to stop the cycle from repeating." He looked at her, his confusion palpable. "What are you talking about?" "This world, Earth. It's been a key to many things for a long time. Your people, my people, all of us. It's been used, manipulated. But you're too blind to see it." She took a deep breath, standing taller now, more resolute than ever before. "This is the final choice. You want to control everything, but you're too afraid of the truth." He took another step, his hand tightening on the weapon at his side. Enough talk, but before he could take another step, the ground beneath them began to tremble. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. Then it grew stronger, the vibrations shaking the very earth beneath their feet. The trees around them creaked and groaned, their branches swaying as though some great force were coming from below. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, their composure faltering. "What's happening?" the leader demanded, his voice rising. Rilia didn't answer immediately. She simply stood still, her eyes closed, as if she were listening to something deeper. He saw the faint glow of her hands, the energy radiating from her body like a pulse, a beacon. This wasn't just a princess anymore. This was the key she had warned about, the power she had hidden for so long, waiting for the right moment. "You think you're in control?" Rilia's voice rang out, stronger now, echoing through the forest. "But you're not anymore." And then the sky above them seemed to crack open. A massive rift, a swirling vortex of light and darkness, appeared in the air above. He shielded his eyes from the intense light, unable to comprehend what was happening. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart, exposing something far beyond their understanding. The hunters recoiled, their weapons raised, but they were no match for what was coming. Rilia stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "This is the truth," she said, "the final truth." The rift widened, and from it a massive shape began to emerge, a shape that could only be described as alien, but not in the way they had expected. It was not a ship or a weapon. It was something far older, far more ancient. A creature, yes, but one made of pure energy, shifting and pulsing in a way that defied all logic. It hovered above them, casting an immense shadow over the clearing. The ground seemed to bend beneath its presence, the air thick with a power that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. Rilia raised her hand, and the creature responded. It shifted, its form twisting and writhing as if it recognized her. The hunters stood frozen, their faces pale with fear. "You wanted power," Rilia said, her voice carrying through the clearing. "But power is not something you control. It is something you understand, and you've failed to understand what's at stake." The energy creature let out a sound, a low, resonating hum that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. And then, with a flick of Rillia's hand, the creature moved forward, its energy enveloping the hunters. But it wasn't violent. It didn't attack. Instead, it surrounded them, trapping them in an aura of energy. The leader let out a strangled gasp, his eyes wide with disbelief as the light from the creature filled the clearing. "You will not take this world," Rillia said. "Not without understanding the cost." The creature withdrew, taking the hunters with it. Slowly, they began to fade into the light, their forms dissolving into the pure energy, as if they had never been there at all. The clearing fell silent. Once more, the forest returning to its quiet state. Rillia turned to him, her eyes soft, but with a weight that spoke of the immense responsibility she had carried. "It's over," she said. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He could hardly process everything that had just happened, the creatures, the power, the truth. The forest felt different now, like a veil had been lifted from their world. He finally spoke, his voice thick with awe. "What did you do?" "I didn't do it," Riley said quietly. "I just showed them the truth. That's all." Her face was calm, but there was a deep sadness behind her eyes, as if the cost of what had happened was only now sinking in. The creatures, her people, hadn't come to destroy, but to reveal, to correct the balance. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We rebuild," she replied, "and we make sure this never happens again." As they stood there, the sky began to clear, the rift closing slowly, its power dissipating into the night. The world, Earth, would never be the same. But maybe that was the point. It had always been about choice, about understanding the consequences of what they did and what they had failed to do. The truth was not just something that was discovered, it was something that was lived. And in the silence that followed, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, he understood. The end wasn't really the end. It was a new beginning for all of them. The end.